Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today we're going to talk a bit about survival and prepper food. Now there's been a long-standing debate about what the most ideal survival food source might be. And throughout this video, I'm going to talk about a system that I created in order to assess what the most optimal survival or prepper food would be for both short, medium, and long-term situations. So this is going to be the first video of many talking about what I call the Survival Food Utility Index. So let's get to it. Alright, so basically how the Survival Food Utility Index works is I have 10 main categories, and of those 10 categories or dimensions or factors, whatever you want to call them, you can rate them out of 10, which would give you a total score of 100 if you were to add it all up at the end. Now there is one wild card factor, which I'm going to talk about towards the end, which could be construed as the 11th factor when it comes to survivability and food. So the 10 dimensions are as follows: taste and palatability, the price per calorie or price per nutrients, the longevity and shelf life, storage requirements, the preparation required, the micronutrient content, the macronutrient content, the accessibility, ruggedness and packaging, the barter ability, and number 11, the wild card factor, is versatility. So let's talk about each one of these factors. Now, number one is taste and palatability, and this is probably the most subjective category there is. So making a quantifiable system, a standardized system as to how we measure how good something tastes is complicated, and whether or not it's relevant to you as a survivalist or prepper is also subjective, because some people don't really care too much about how the food tastes so long as it is something that's going to nourish them. But on a long enough timeline, I think we can all appreciate the taste of good food. So there's 10 sub-criteria within this category that I've come up with in order to assess how good something tastes, and they are as follows. So if it's warm, you would get 1 point. A hot meal is typically something that's taken over a cold one. If it's natural, you add another point. If it's sweet, you would add a point. If it's salty, you would add a point, obviously within reason. If it has a nice texture, you would add a point. If there's a novelty factor to it, so if there's some diversity of the contents, that would increase a point. So for instance, freeze-dried food, if you were to get a bucket of that stuff, there's a wide variety of different things that you get within that bucket compared to a bucket of rice, which is all going to taste the same. So that novelty factor, the diversity of contents, goes a long way. Also, the repetitive eating factor. So this one would pertain to the rice. Rice is a staple. Most of the staple foods are going to be high on this dimension simply because you can eat them every day without necessarily getting bored with them, as long as you have some condiment. And that is the 9th criteria, is that can it be mixed with other things? So, can you use condiments with it? Rice is something that can be mixed with a lot of different things, whereas something like survival tabs is not something you're going to want to eat with rice. And I struggled to find a number 10, so I just threw this one in there, and is it allergy prone? So this isn't really related to taste so much, but it's the only thing I could think of. So if there's any more things that you could think that we could use to describe what would go into the palatability and the taste factor to make it a solid 10 criteria, leave your suggestions below in the comments. So number 2 is much easier to quantify, and that's the cost per calorie or the cost per nutrients. So basically we would break it down that how many calories do you get per $1 of the food stuff. And you could also say how many percentage of your nutrients, the micronutrients that you would need on a daily basis, do you get from that food stuff. And of course the percentage of the macronutrients do you get per dollar of that substance. That's what we would use as a baseline to determine what has the best price. So a 10 out of 10 in this area would be a food that yielded the highest amount of nutrients and calories, a balance of the two, for $1 spent. So that would probably be something like flour or rice. The different types of food that correspond to these categories I'm going to go over in greater detail in a future video. So number 3 is longevity and shelf life. Now obviously this is going to be a huge one, especially for people who are concerned with the long-term survival scenarios, the global grid down, total economic collapse, EMP, nuclear war, whatever the case might be. You're thinking long term. And not even for the sole benefit of long-term survival, but simply for the fact that you don't have to rotate these foods out, that you can park them in the basement and they're going to last for a long period of time. Now, the rating system I came up for this is quite simple. So in order for something to get a score of 10 out of 10, basically the shelf life has to be over 30 years to indefinite. So something like that might be honey or something that was properly stored like rice. Now, 20 to 30 years would yield a 9 out of 10. 10 to 20 years would be 7 out of 10. 6 to 10 years would be 6 out of 10. And anything 5 years and under would be 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1 point respectively. So if it was 5 years shelf life, it would be 5 points. If it was only a 1 year shelf life, it would only get 1 point. Now, for some people, a 5-year MRE is all you need. But unfortunately, in terms of longevity, MREs don't fare that well. They just simply are not the ideal long-term storage food. But as we'll see, they do have their benefits in other dimensions. Number 4 is storage requirements. So this is a big and broad category. And in order to get a 10 out of 10 in this category, you would have to be able to have a food that could be stored anywhere, in any environmental condition, within reason, of course, plus 40, minus 40, it could be exposed to sunlight for prolonged periods of time. You didn't have to worry about pests, things of that nature. That would be a 10 out of 10. Now, if you have to do climate control, if you have to store it in a cool, dry place, that is going to bring down that score. And this is all subjective. This is based on a case-by-case basis. So this number 4 is not as easy for us to standardize. Also, you have to take into consideration humidity, mold, lighting, as I said before. What sort of containers are required for this? Does it require canning? Do you require mylar? Is there vacuum sealing involved, oxygen absorbers, desiccant packets? What is the cost of all these accessories? And another factor to consider with storage requirements is, of course, the amount of space that's taken up by the stuff you store. So depending on what you store, some things are more dense than others. So for instance, olive oil is a very dense form of energy. 1 tablespoon of that has 120 calories, whereas 1 tablespoon of freeze-dried food may only contain 10 calories. So you're going to have a much bigger space in order to store the same amount of calories of food. So basically there we're looking at density, weight, and calorie ratio. Obviously, if you're storing something like MREs, another thing you're going to want to consider is that you're storing water weight. So you're not getting things in their concentrated form like you are with freeze-dried, where you would rehydrate them. You actually have to store the water in hand as well, which does have its benefits, but of course has its drawbacks in terms of long-term storage, because storing that many MREs for 1 to 2 years length of time is going to take a lot of space. Number 5 is going to be the amount of preparation required and what sort of tools will be required. Also, what sort of accessories will be required. So do you need water to cook the stuff? For something to be 10 out of 10 in this area, it would have to be almost entirely self-contained. So this might be an area where the MREs excel, where the survival tabs excel, or where the Deltrex emergency food ration bars excel, because basically you pull them out of the box and you eat them. Everything that you need to eat it is there. You don't need water, you don't need anything else. So if water is required, you would less a point. If some sort of condiments are required to make it palatable, you would also less a point. If you need those BTUs or heat energy in order to cook it, you would less a point. If you require tools to do it or fuel, you would less a point. And of course, the time needed in order to prepare the food is something to consider as well. So rice, if you don't have a way to heat up water, is going to take hours to get to a point where it's palatable. Number 6 would be the micronutrient content. So in order to get a 10 out of 10 in this category, within a 2,000 calorie dose of the food in question, you would have to have 100% of your micronutrient needs fulfilled. So that means that if you were to dish out 2,000 calories of that food stuff, you would have to have all the vitamins and minerals you needed to function for 1 day. That would be a 10 out of 10. If it was 90% of all those that you needed, it would be a 9 out of 10, and so on. The same thing goes for macronutrient content. And basically macronutrients, what I'm talking about here is the distribution of proteins, fats, fiber, carbohydrates, because we need all these things in a certain balance in order to survive long term. So the same thing applies within that 2,000 calories of the food stuff. What is the distribution of proteins, carbs, fats, fibers, with particular emphasis on the essential amino acids that the body cannot produce itself? I know that there's 12 out of 20 of the amino acids that the human body needs, our bodies can actually produce from our fat cells and from carbohydrates. 8 of those we can only get from certain proteins. That's why vegetarians need to combine different types of food in order to get the proteins that they need to survive, and that's why people tend to eat meat or animal products. So if it contains all the essential proteins, and if it has a nice distribution of proteins, carbs, fats, and fibers, then it's probably going to be a 10 out of 10. Another thing to consider for this category would be biological value, or how many of those calories that are indicated on the package do you actually get into your system. So survival tabs, for instance, boast a very high biological value, something to the effect of 90%. So they claim that if you were to eat 100 calories of their survival tabs, you would actually get 90% of that. Whereas there's certain foods where you're only getting, 50%, your body's only absorbing that much of it. So biological value is another huge factor. Number 8 would be accessibility. So how easy is it to acquire the food in the first place? So a 10 out of 10 would be something that you could get almost anywhere. You could get it at a corner store, a restaurant, anything like that. So I'm thinking here of something like salt or sugar. So something that would be more harder to come by might be something that you had to get online, maybe had to order it from overseas, something that isn't made or available locally. So there's different concentric layers of accessibility. Depending on the ubiquity of the product, that's going to determine whether it gets a 10 out of 10 here. Now, number 9 is the ruggedness of packaging. So to get a 10 out of 10 here, basically it's going to have to be UV resistant, it's going to have to be waterproof, it's going to have to be pest proof, it's going to perhaps have resealable packaging, it's going to have sealed packaging, of course, which is going to be resistant to all the elements, something that's mold and mildew resistant. It's going to have that robust, durable packaging, and possibly things that are individually packed would be ranked higher in this category. So things that come to mind are MREs. Those things are made to survive being dropped from airplanes and survive all sorts of adverse climates and environments. So MREs would rank very high in this category. Now, number 10 would be in the commodities barterability. So basically what we're looking at here is what is the weight to value ratios. So for example, rice would have a very low weight to value ratio. So for instance, you might trade 1 pound of rice for 100 grams of honey. So there's a different value depending on the weight of it, which would make it easy to barter if you had to transport it to a marketplace. And another thing to factor in here, of course, is the supply and demand. Is it a rare commodity? Is it something that is native to the region that you're in, and there's going to be lots of in that region? Or is it something which is foreign that only you possess? And of course, this barterability factor is only going to be something that's relevant in a long-term situation, but depending on the lifestyle you lead, if you're a homesteader, it may well be something you partake in even when the grid is up. The wildcard factor here is versatility. So can the food in question be used for alternate purposes otherwise than just ingesting for sustenance? So something like salt, for instance, would have a very high versatility because it can be used for a variety of things. If you look at MREs, lots of MREs have within them different tools that you can use. So there's some cookware, there's the packaging, serviette or a napkin or something like that, that also has added value there. So versatility is a wild card factor. Is it very relevant? I don't know. I would like to hear your thoughts and insights on this. Now, another potential wildcard factor I've considered is the regeneration aspect. So if you are storing something which is edible in its seed form, if you could actually plant that thing and grow more of that stuff, then that would be something which would add added value and which should increase the score to some degree. But there's not many things you can store for long periods of time that are going to be edible and regrowth aspect to them. So that's something I would like your feedback on as well. So just to give you an idea of how a food might factor in here, so I'm going to use rice as the example because that's one of the main prepper foods. It's one of the most cost effective, right? So it's one that a lot of people will store. So I'm just going to go through all the dimensions. I'm going to provide you with the rationale and I'm going to give you the score. So for taste, because it's very uniform and it's moderate, I gave it a 6 out of 10. The price is very low for approximately 35 to 4,500 calories depending on what the price of rice is. So this is probably going to be a 10 out of 10. The longevity of rice, if stored properly, will be 30 plus years, so that's going to be a 10 out of 10. In terms of storage density and weight, it's going to require a cool dry place, it's going to require mylar, oxygen absorbers and buckets, so the score for that is going to be a 3 out of 10. So in terms of how easy it is to prepare, you're going to need water, you're going to need heat, and you're going to need a lot of time. So I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10. Micronutrient content, I'm going to give it high score. So that's going to be an 8 out of 10. Macronutrients, high score, but doesn't have a complete amino acid profile. So it's going to be a 6 out of 10. The ruggedness factor, if stored in pails, it will be relatively strong, especially if you have it within mylar within those pails. So that's going to be an 8 out of 10. The marketability or the barter ability is going to be moderate, so that's going to be a 6 out of 10. The versatility is going to be almost nothing, so that's going to be a 1 out of 10. The accessibility, of course, is going to be significantly high. You can pretty much get it anywhere. You can pretty much even get it at the corner store, I think, so that's going to be about a 10 out of 10. So the total score for rice is going to be a 73 out of 110. So for some of those I did estimate on, so in terms of micronutrients and macronutrients. So if I really wanted to dial this in with all the proper calculations, that number is subject to change. I would say plus or minus 10. So that's what I have so far with respect to the Survival Food Utility Index. I would really like to get your feedback on some things that I could include in this in order to perfect it. Maybe someday I might put this into some sort of publication. I'm not entirely sure yet. I would invite you all to partake in a survey that I've had on my website for the last few weeks. It's just a very quick 3-second survey. There's only 3 questions, and it's just to get a bit more insight with regards to what the conventional beliefs are around some of the stuff that I've talked about today in terms of what you might think the best survival food might be, and what do you think the most important factor is to consider of all the factors that I've laid out here today. So in future videos, I plan on going into more depth about the specific types of food and how they rank on this Survival Food Utility Index. But this video was just an opportunity for me to get the word out there and to hopefully get some great comments back from all my intelligent subscribers who I know are going to have a lot to say about this topic. So thank you for watching, commenting, and partaking in the food survey. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you found the content useful today. It really does help the channel out. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out. Check out the Canadian Preppers Network blog, an excellent resource for survivalists and preppers.